Did you know that right now I have a perfect record in the UFC?
In the UFC.
Perfect record. Completely undefeated.
In the United Fighting Conference.
I'm not exactly sure what UFC. I think it's like Ultimate Fighter or something.
Ultimate Fighting
Yep.
Conference.
Perfect record. Never been beat.
Perfect record.
Never, ever been beat.
When did you fight?
Well, that's the kicker, isn't it? So yeah, perfect record. Completely undefeated, 100%. Never
Jeremy?
been beaten. Yes.
Jeremy,
Mm-hmm.
if you've never competed, how can you be undefeated?
Are you going to poke a hole in everything that I say?
If you've never ever been in the ring, you aren't undefeated. You are uncompeted.
That is the perfect way to. I was gonna say untested, but uncompeted. That
I don't know if that's a word, but I'm gonna make it one.
We will
You are
write.
uncompeted.
Write to the Oxford Dictionary and tell them we would like you to add uncompeted to the. Oh, which mug do you have?
Uncompeted. It's you're driving me crazy.
Oh yeah, that's like
Balin made it.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're driving me crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to see
Uncompeted.
uncompeted.
And definition. Never competed.
All right. Fine. I was going to use untested because it has a lot to do with what we're going to talk about in this.
Untested is too official for this.
So you're just going to call me uncompeted. All right. Fine. I am uncompeted, but I'm still undefeated. Irrefutable, undefeatable.
My world is revolving around 7 and 8 year olds right now. Uncompeted is a good word.
Agreed. It works. It works. So, hey, we're back again, and it has been about 4 minutes since our last video.
4.5.
Yeah, 4.5 minutes. So hey, you got a twofer this time around, and so
We didn't even change outfits.
I know. If we were like really official, we would just we could have traded shirts, but that would be really weird.
I think there's a size discrepancy.
There is, yes, but I mean, I guess it would make my guns look like way better. But so, anyways, we're back.
Hebrews chapter 5.
Hebrews chapter 5, which actually, incidentally, and ironically or not enough, Hebrews chapter 5 is actually just a continuation of Hebrews chapter 4.
It is.
Isn't it amazing how that works? Like numbers, they go in order. It's like somebody sat down and, but yeah. And if this is your first time watching one of our videos, then
we really aren't stupid. We're just sarcastic and silly.
yes. We've also helped people to understand that the Bible as we have it today, well, we have it, sort of, it's a collection of writings that were collected over literally thousands of years, written by different people at different points in time in history and with different experiences and different perspectives. And what we've done now in the later years, in the last couple thousand years actually, is taken those writings, collected them, put them together, and then we added the chapter and verse marks to help it make it easier when we do stuff like this, when we talk about the Bible, so we can all know and reference.
Gives it an address.
Yeah, it gives an address. You know what you're looking at. And sometimes, for some reason, they put the breaks in weird places. And the editors or the scribes or whoever that decided where to put the breaks in the I always have a hard time. We traditionally call it a letter. It's not really a letter. It's a sermon, but not.
In Hebrews.
In Hebrews, they for some reason broke up Hebrews 4 and 5 right in the middle of the same idea. So if you remember, in the last video, it ended with, therefore we have a high priest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now it continues on talking about that high priest. So here we are in chapter 5.
Which we said was Jesus.
Exactly, yeah.
Right,
Yes.
okay.
Just to bring folks up to speed. Because we don't have, like, previously.
Previously on this video with
Yeah.
Jeremy and Karen and their silliness.
Yes. No.
That was a great deep voice.
That is
I was
amazing
able-
announcer voice.
I had to, like,
Really
make
good.
my face look like I had double chins to get down there.
Hey, you should, maybe that's...
Yeah, no,
when
I don't think
you get
that's...
done with teaching, you can go into voice acting. So, you do trailers and stuff.
Yeah, probably not.
Okay.
Coming to a theater near you. Woohoo. I don't think people will want that. Okay, so anyway,
No,
we have
we're
a high
gonna get
priest.
a-
Let's
like a
do this thing. Come on, come on, come
Copyright
on.
strike because you did the Minnie Mouse voice. And it's,
I wasn't gonna say her name, and now you just said her
you'll
name.
have to bleep it out, I guess. So we'll
It's
fix
not
it
my
in
fault
post.
my voice sounds that way.
Anyhow, we're here in chapter 5 of Hebrews. If you have your Bible, if you have a Bible app, if you're on your computer and you want to look up Bible Gateway, you sure can. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And on our website, we actually have a list of resources that we find helpful that you might as well. And so here we go, Hebrews chapter 5.
Yep.
We're moving things along because Karen's got an egg timer going tick, 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 tick.
It's not that bad.
Oh, it feels more like the clock on 24, with Jack Bauer. It's like going boop, 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 boop. But or not.
No.
Here we go. All right. Hebrews chapter 5. Every high priest is selected from among the people and is appointed to represent the people in matters related to God, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with those who are ignorant and are going astray, since he himself is subject to weakness. This is why he has to offer sacrifices for his own sins, as well as those for the sins of the people. And no one takes this honor on himself, but he receives it when called by God, just as Aaron was. In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, "You are my son. Today I have become your father." And he says in another place, "You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. We have much to say about this, but it's hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand. In fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. All right, so so the author of Hebrews, starts kind of soft, and then he brings the heat. Wow, or they, because we don't know, and the author is anonymous. But anyway, the author of Hebrews starts out nice, talking about priests and being gentle, right?
Right? Well, he does say,
With the ignorant.
he's able to deal with the ignorant.
Right.
He's able to deal with the dummies. But
Right. Now hold on. Now,
there's a difference between ignorant and dumb. I know.
Yes, yeah.
I know.
ignorant is just not knowing, and
Yes.
actually, it's kind of this idea here is kind of it serves as parentheses right around
Right.
this whole statement, because he says the priests are able to deal gently with people who don't know any better, but in the end he says,
Yes.
but you're choosing not to.
Exactly.
We're going to talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
But so there is a big difference. But yeah, so we're continuing the idea of the high priest, and the author of Hebrews starts off by talking about what a human high priest does, and he gives us these examples from from history of the high priest. And you talked about it in the
Yes.
last video, what
Right.
the high priest had to do.
He's talking about the high priest of Israel. So he's talking about a Jewish high priest. And they were the ones that offered the sacrifice once a year. And they were the ones that would go into the Holy of Holies to offer the sacrifice for the people. And so when we're talking about no one takes this honor on himself, but receives it when called by God, just as Aaron did. Aaron was the high priest. And there were only the priests called from the certain tribe, and that was the tribe of Levi.
And they weren't like, they didn't put themselves up for the job, right?
No, God chose the tribe of Levi to be priests.
Well, I mean, even more specifically, the person who was the high priest,
Yeah.
it wasn't like there were like posters or, well, I guess they didn't have posters, but like scrolls back then that said,
Vote for Aaron.
Vote for Aaron for high priest this
No.
millennium.
No,
they
God selected
Right.
them. And I think that we still have that to some extent today. There's a lot of pastors that feel that is their calling. I think a lot of people misuse that word calling. That they feel that they're doing a job because it's what they're called to do. But at the same time, God places us in certain jobs at certain times for certain reasons. And what it's being referred to here is the high priest of Israel. And they were appointed by God. And in the same way, Christ didn't take on the job of being a high priest, but it was appointed to him.
Right.
Jesus, being God, talking about that Trinity again, God the Father existing in three people, God the Son was always to be the sacrifice. And that's where we get this, you are my son and today I've become your father. That was actually spoken over, correct me if I'm wrong, it was spoken in Psalms over Solomon, was it not?
You know what? You put me on the spot. Well, should we look it up in real time?
Why don't we look it up in
Let's
real
do
time?
that.
It was
So-
Psalms 2:7.
Yeah.
See, this is how it works, people. When you use Bible Gateway, it's very simple to look up a Bible verse, just like that.
Oops, come on, scroll.
Very
Let's
nice.
see the
And we're
whole
going to
chapter.
read the full chapter. So we just click on read the full chapter. Bible Gateway. Yeah.
Are you read it silently?
So,
Okay.
why do the nations conspire and the people plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers band together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. The one enthroned in heaven laughs, and the Lord scoffs at them. He rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in his wrath, saying, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. Ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possessions. I will break them with the rod of iron, and you will dash them to pieces like pottery. Okay, so let's go back up. This is David.
Right. This is
and-
David writing, but he's not writing about himself. He's writing prophetically about the Messiah.
About the Messiah.
Yep.
Yeah, very much so. So when you are my son, and today I've become your father. This God talking to Jesus prophetically through David's writing.
Yes. That's very confusing.
Awesome.
But
No, but also, in a way, David is also, he's running from people who are trying to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, some of this could be God's promise to him as well, but it also foretells of the Messiah and what will happen.
Right, and a lot of times, the prophets didn't necessarily know, well, a good deal of the time, they didn't know exactly what their messages were going to mean when they wrote them down. And so, so this is David, again, he's writing prophetically. The one enthroned in heaven, he's talking about, God the Father. And he rebukes them in his anger and terrifies them in wrath. And he says, I've installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Right? And so, so this is David, and again, he says, against his anointed.
Right. That's not against someone fully human.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, who is just human.
Just human.
Yeah.
Jesus was fully human, but he was also fully God.
Yeah.
So when we use that as a way of saying don't talk against God's anointed on earth, that's not always used correctly.
There you go. Yeah, you brought it home. You got that.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. So we're talking here about, again, the high priest, and previously we said that the high priest was not one who, he didn't go out and politic for this place. God chose him. And so we believe that from the foundation and before the creation of the universe, God foreknew everything that was going to happen. He knew the necessity of a Savior. We've talked about that before. We talk about the Old Testament. We talk about the covenant. When Moses is talking to the people, and he doesn't say if you break these rules or if you break this covenant, he says when. So God knows you're going to do it. And so God all along the way had all of these contingencies in place to deal with our human weaknesses and our human insufficiencies, because he knew that we couldn't do it. But the point wasn't for us to do it. Again, and this is the message of the gospel. The point isn't for us to be perfect on our own strength. The point is for us to receive that justification and that righteousness through his Son, through Jesus, through his sacrifice. And so it goes back to chapter 4, where we're talking about entering into that rest. We didn't really mention it in the previous video, but oftentimes we talk about entering into rest. We think about going into the presence of God. We think about when you die, that's sort of like the final rest for you. And obtaining that and being able to enter into God's presence requires not our effort, but it requires our faith. Right, in God, and faith and trusting him that he is faithful to what he says he's going to do. And so in the same way, he had this plan put in place from the very beginning. And with all due respect to some of our friends who are members of another religion, Jesus didn't volunteer. Right. There wasn't like a straw poll. This was something that was chosen in the unity of the Godhead, that Jesus would be the one that would fulfill this role. So it wasn't like Jesus is trying to step in and take something that doesn't belong to him. Right. But that it was something that was assigned to him as part of just the essence of who he is, who he was at the very beginning. And so this idea here that the author of Hebrews is trying to get across here is that Jesus is a high priest, but a different kind of high priest. Not like the kind of high priest that we're used to, the one that represents us because he's one of us. Right. Because in previously, the high priests were chosen, just like it says there in Hebrews, they were chosen from among the people. And in this case, Jesus isn't necessarily part of the people. He was outside of that, which is really important when we get to the next part here, where it says in verse 7, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, and was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. And so Again, to be able to understand this little section of text, you have to have a little bit of an understanding of some of the other stories and some of the other things that are in the Old Testament and in Israel's history, right? And there, if you're following along and you're paying close attention and you're reading those words up there, there may be 2 verses up there that are like making you say, whoa, 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 whoa. This does not make any sense. And I think that's what Karen is like. She's got a big grin on her face. Don't worry. We're going to explode this out a little bit so that you'll be able to understand what's happening here. Because when at first glance, if you don't understand the background of what's going on here, those verses can easily be taken completely out of context to say something that they do not say. And just our little cold opener was entirely 100% intentional, because I'm going to refer back to that, and I hope that it will help you to understand this tension that you're feeling in reading those verses. There's another gnat. Okay, listen, it's not because we're like gross people. For Father's Day, Baylin bought me Baylin and Noah bought me a money tree. Isn't it amazing? I did not name it. I'm not one of those weirdos.
Literally called a money tree.
It's called a money tree. I don't know why, but anyhow, it probably needs some water too. I better do that. Anyways, it attracts bugs for some reason, and I don't know what else. If you're out there watching and you know how to, get rid of gnats that are attracted to your money tree, let me know. I'd be happy to do whatever it takes, because I'm tired of. Anyways. So here's a little bit of the backstory. We like to go on little weird tangents. Melchizedek, what a weird name, and who is this guy? Tell us all about it.
He was a priest.
He was a priest, okay? A priest.
A high priest.
Okay.
And a very important high priest.
Okay.
In the Old Testament.
Okay. Is there more?
Probably. I'm really tired.
It's okay. You just take a nap.
I need to find rest.
You need that rest. Okay.
Melchizedek was a very important high priest.
So here's the story. I'll try to make it quick. Abraham, he went out to rescue Lot, because Lot...
That's right.
Yeah. Lot got taken captive. See, I don't remember who the bad guys were. But anyway, some bad guys. You can look that up in your Bible in Genesis. Bad guys took Lot. Abraham took his homies, and Abraham was a baller, and he went and he killed the bad guys, took Lot. What? Baller's like, yeah, he's like, yeah. Took Lot, brought him back. Okay. And along the way, this guy named Melchizedek comes down from this place called Salem. Yep. If you might have heard that word Salem before, we're not talking about, Salem where the witches are. We're talking about Salem, Jerusalem. Okay. Yep. He was a priest and king of that city before... Sorry, he didn't have enough hands to cover you there. Okay. He was priest and king of that city before it became the capital city of Israel. Yes. Way before the Hebrews had set up permanent occupation of the Holy Land.
Yes. And he helped Abraham, and Abraham wanted to tithe or give 10%, if you will, of what
the spoils
he had taken when he took back his nephew and took from them because they took from him. So that's how it used to be done, right? Yep. And so he gave him 10% of the spoils.
Yeah, so Melchizedek is a mysterious person in the Bible, because
we don't know a lot about him.
Right, beyond the fact that we know that he was a priest and king in Salem, he was a priest of God, of the God Almighty. Yeah. Okay, so remember, this is also of Yahweh. Okay, this is also pre-covenant time, so there isn't a covenant Israel yet. There's just Abraham, right? And so there were still people before that time who served God. Come on.
We don't know how.
We don't know all of the details. The Bible only tells us the story of one thin line that leads to Jesus. There were other side stories going on that we're not aware of. And so there were other believers in God. There were other servants of God out there in the world. And
the Bible gives us ideas of them, like Melchizedek. What a great name. Yeah.
Melchizedek was one of them, right? And so Abraham recognized his position as a priest and king and offered him a tithe of the booty.
At 10%.
10% of the take when he beat up the bad guys and rescued Lot. Okay? And so he's not the only one. We also have Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, right? Who was called what? A priest of Midian,
God, a
right?
priest of
He's a priest of God or a priest of Midian.
Yeah.
He was God's priest in Midian. So Jethro was also a servant of God, but he was
Yeah.
not part of the covenant people.
Right.
So there were people that still served God, and so it's one of those mystery things in the sense of the Bible doesn't talk about them, but that doesn't mean that they weren't there and they weren't legitimate.
Exactly.
But in this case, don't
No,
remember what you're going to
you're
say.
good. You're
In
good.
this case, the Hebrew people and the writers of Genesis chose to point out and make a big deal about Melchizedek because he occupied this very special, unique thing in history as priest and king.
And that's why Jesus is in the order of Melchizedek, because he is priest and king.
Right.
And I just want to take this moment to apologize to Noah, our son, for not giving him the name Melchizedek.
Yeah.
We missed a golden opportunity.
You could have a really cool nickname like Chiz or Deck. I mean, that could be really.
I'm so
there's a lot
sorry,
of-
son.
Mel. Yeah, there's a lot of cool
We
nicknames.
could
you
have
work
called
out
him
of that.
Melchi.
Melchi. Right? Okay,
So
so
sorry, Noah. So sorry.
so that gives so that is one really important piece of
I'm sorry.
it's okay, you're slap happy and it's getting late. It's okay. You gotta get your medication soon. Or else you just start howling at the moon or something. Is it a full moon tonight? I don't know.
Melchi.
So, why is Jesus in the order of Melchizedek? One, because he's priest
He's a
and king.
priest and king.
He occupies
Yes.
both of that.
Yes.
But also because he wasn't chosen from among the Hebrew people.
No, he was
outside.
chosen from
Right.
outside of the Hebrew people.
Yeah.
Even though he was born
Yes.
in the Hebrew people.
Yes.
To
All right.
the Hebrew people.
Okay.
Oh, help me. Sorry.
Here we go. So let's go back and
Okay.
take a look. Because there are some challenging things here in verses 7, 8, 9, and 10. That's why I got them
Yes.
highlighted on the screen. Because if we don't read carefully and think critically and think carefully, you're going to come to conclusions that are not accurate with what Scripture is saying here and with what the author of Hebrews is saying. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries. Okay, remember, that's an important piece right there. During the days of Jesus' life on earth. Okay?
Yeah.
That is an important key of what's going on here. Remember, Jesus, like we said earlier, coexisted with God from before creation, from all time eternity. So Jesus was not created. He did not come to be. He always was, always is, and always will be. However, he was not always incarnate on the earth.
Right.
Right? Okay? This is going to be very important here in just a second, and I'm going to try my very best to lay this out, because sometimes I see these things clearly in my head and I don't get them out my mouth very well.
Right.
But, so, this idea is very important. We're talking about his time on earth. Okay?
Right.
He offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. He occupied a physical, fragile, human body. Right?
Just like we all do.
Just like we all do.
Yeah.
That is susceptible to illness. That is
Yeah.
susceptible to physical pain.
Yeah.
If you're interested in my thoughts on pain, watch the video before, because pain is amoral. It has no good or bad. It just is.
Yeah.
But we don't always like it, and we need help when we're in pain. He was subject to the same sort of insecurities that we as human beings have, the same physical limitations. We can't fly. We can't teleport. We can't do all of these really cool stuff that we wish we could do. We are limited in time and space.
Yeah.
We are bound by time and space. So we have this frail, weak body. And we are, let's be honest, as tough and macho as we want to be, death is something that none of us are ever like, woo, let's do it. Death is something that's uncertain for us.
Right.
Right? We can have a great deal of faith, but the truth is none of us actually have the experience of having died, so we don't know what's going to happen on the other side. So just real talk here, death is something that for all people is something that we're concerned about, right? That's the whole point. We are concerned about what happens to us when we die. And so, but in spite of all of those things, it says that he was heard because of his reverent submission. So remember in chapter 4 where we said the people didn't trust God, they didn't obey.
Right.
Jesus trusted God and he obeyed.
Exactly.
Okay, and so his prayers
He still
were
knew
heard,
who he
right?
was.
Right. Yeah.
He
But-
still knew who he was.
But he still had the full human
Experience.
limitations, the full human experiences. That's why
Yeah.
verse 8 is important. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. Okay, so verse 8 and 9 can be really difficult for us to understand. Go ahead.
If we think about it, you know, every baby has diaper rash once.
Right?
Every teenager has at least one zit.
Mm-hmm.
At least. You know, everybody gets a gray hair. Or 4 or 5 or 6. I won't tell you how many I pull out each day. Like, you know, there's things in life. Everybody stubs their toe.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Everybody gets a hangnail, a splinter. Jesus was a carpenter.
Mm-hmm.
He probably hit his nail with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. Like, who on earth hasn't cut themselves with a knife somehow?
Yeah.
Everybody has.
Mm-hmm. At least once today.
At least. You know? Or paper cuts.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about all the different ways that we can get hurt. Get an eyelash in your eye. You know, ingrown hair. Like, think about all the different things. You know, a bug in your ear. I don't know. Like, sorry.
Right.
Just thinking about weird things now.
Yeah.
But, you know, all the things that could happen, of course we learn from all of those things.
Right. Right, and so...
And Jesus was no different.
Yeah. And I think 8 and 9 can sometimes cause us to ask 2 questions. Okay, if Jesus is God and he's so perfect, why did he need to learn anything? Question number 1. Right? Why did he have to learn if he was God and he's so perfect? And question number 2, wait a second. We just said if he is so perfect, then how was he made perfect? Okay, so first we'll take a look at question number 1, which is right there in verse 8, where Karen was talking about we learn from the things that we go through. We can have a book knowledge of something.
Right.
We can have a knowledge or an idea of how something works, but we don't actually learn about it until we put our hands on it and we actually put it into action and we make it happen, right? Okay. A really, really good example is when I was in college and we first got married. For those of you that don't know this, my major in college was the Spanish language.
Yeah.
And there was not anything that I could not read or write. You wouldn't have known the difference of whether I was a native reader or writer, okay? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can judge a person's reading. But anyways, because I had the intellectual, educational foundation of Spanish. But my senior year, I was selected to go on to a study abroad program in Spain, and I thought, oh yeah, I can handle this because I know, because I'd gone through, I was in my last year, I've gone through all of the upper level classes, the whole 9 yards. I know all of the verb tenses and how to use them and all of that stuff. And so no big deal. We got there and I was like lost in a world of thetas and right? Because I didn't have the practical application of making the words come out of my mouth. The words existed in my head, but they didn't come physically from me. And so while I had the theoretical knowledge of something, I didn't actually have the experience of having done it. So Jesus had in him, as incarnate human, the theoretical knowledge of what it means to be a human who obeys. But the fact was that even though he is eternal God, he was never human before.
Right.
And so he had to have experienced what it was like for a person to be obedient. Okay?
Right.
So it wasn't that he learned. It's not like when Karen says, I'll teach you to obey. Whack, whack, whack. No, she would never hit any of the kids at school.
No.
Never. Never. Right. Never. Okay?
I really wouldn't. I really wouldn't.
No, she loves her kids, and she would never do that. But there are, for a lot of times, most of us, we learned because somebody gave us a good chanclazo or something and helped us to learn to be obedient.
Chanclazo. They hit us with a flip-flop.
Yeah, or a belt, or a stick, or, who knows what.
Or, like me in Spain, I could speak the language, so I thought, but all I could speak was Mexican Spanish, and I couldn't read any of the signs,
Yeah,
or any of the anything.
right.
And so I had to learn by making mistakes and getting laughed at.
Yeah, and so it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily so it wasn't that Jesus was insufficient in having possessing something. It was that he hadn't yet experienced it, and so the learned here wasn't that I'm gonna make you learn because you got a stubborn hard head. It was you need to experience obedience from a human perspective, which means
Right.
you have to know what it's like to be hungry and to be able to know that you can turn that piece of rock into bread, but you're going to trust God
But you
and
don't
not
have to.
do it. But you don't have to.
Yeah.
And that's what it means that he learned obedience through from what he suffered. Y'all, I don't know about you guys, but I get kind of cranky if I haven't had, dinner or lunch. And Jesus
He
was
gets
40 days in the desert, and Satan told him, hey, make that piece of rock there into some bread and end this thing. That would have been very tempting. He was probably feeling hunger pangs, and that sounded like a pretty good idea.
Probably.
But he experienced obedience through that suffering.
Yeah.
Okay, so he didn't. So it wasn't like he was insufficient or he needed something necessarily. It's that he needed to have experienced that
Right.
as a human being, which ties in then into verse number 9. And once made perfect. Okay, wait, isn't Jesus perfect? How do you become perfect if you're already perfect, right? And here's the deal. If you remember back at the beginning of this video, I said that I have a perfect record in the UFC, right? Completely undefeated. Well, that doesn't mean anything because I've never fought in the UFC.
You've never been in the octagon.
I am 0 for 0.
I even know what it means
Yeah,
to be in the
good job.
octagon.
Yeah,
Hey.
well, that's because you watch Here Comes the Boom. So, but
No one likes to watch UFC fighting,
Oh,
so
yeah,
I've seen
it
a
is
few
fun.
matches.
it is fun. But the point being is that I can't claim to be a UFC fighter because I've never stepped into the octagon. In the same sense, Jesus could not have claimed to be a perfect human if he didn't step onto earth and actually live it out and make it through the whole process
Put
of
on a
being
skin
human.
suit.
Put on a skin suit, right? And go through the whole process of being a human. He didn't
Right.
attain that perfect humanity until he went from wah 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 to into your hands I commit my spirit.
That's right.
Right? And at that point, Jesus had a perfect undefeated record. Up until just before he had committed, actually, let me correct myself because it's actually more than that. It was up until just before that boom, flash, rocks roll out of the way, he hadn't completed his mission on earth.
Right.
But then on his resurrection, in that moment, he was the perfect
Perfected.
human. Undefeated, Satan 0, Jesus all of the numbers or whatever.
All the numbers
Right.
with the keys in hand.
With the keys in hand. So Jesus, it wasn't that he wasn't perfect, it's that his humanity hadn't been perfect yet because he hadn't started it. But he then completed that humanity, which then made it perfect.
Perfect.
Okay? And so Jesus wasn't lacking anything. And I'm not playing games with words here, and I'm not trying to twist around the Greek, you'll notice I didn't do any crazy Greeky stuff. Just looking at the actual text and seeing that this is what the author of Hebrews is talking about. This is why it's important here, and it becomes amazingly important because here is the linchpin of the whole thing. Jesus could have remained in heaven and pretended to be a priest for us, but he couldn't have done it effectively because he did not have
Right.
the human experience.
Right.
And so now that takes us that callback all the way back to the end of chapter 4, which I said should have been part of chapter 5, where Jesus is our perfect high priest because he has had the perfect human experience. He learned obedience by being obedient and having
Exactly.
experienced all of those things. and he became perfected in terms of having a perfect record of human life. And that couldn't have been done unless he had become incarnate and lived on earth as a human being. And so here it says, and once made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him.
Yeah.
And so now he becomes our substitute. He is
Exactly.
the human being who came from outside of us, entered into us, sort of like Melchizedek was outside of the Hebrews, but he entered into them for that moment. Jesus came outside from humanity and entered into us, lived that perfect record, and he went out to champ because he couldn't be beaten, and now he is sitting at the right hand of the Father, advocating on our behalf, saying, hey, I did the job. And now he is our priest advocating for us, and he is our king who is saying, hey, I passed the judgment here, and
Exactly.
so I will judge you based on my own merits. And
Exactly.
he sees us as innocent.
Exactly.
So that is all really awesome stuff. And we're like, woohoo! But wait.
But then there's this heading, warning against falling away. So here's my thing, because there are those that would say, if you are truly saved and you walk away from the faith, were you ever really saved in the first place? And there's those that would say you have backslidden. That great old word, backslide. And there are those that would say, God has never left you, but you have left him. That's kind of the camp I think I'm falling myself in, because the author of Hebrews is giving us this warning that we can accept God and we can be all in. But if we are not willing to grow and to mature, then are we really going to be able to distinguish between what's good and what's not good? And are we really going to have that kind of relationship with him that will keep us in relationship with him? And are we going to be able to withstand and maintain in those times when it gets difficult? So we have much to say about this, talking about, about Jesus being our high priest, but it is hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand. So are these those people that have kind of whoop and turned away and are going the other way and have said, yeah, I don't know about this God stuff? Or are those people that are like, well, I never knew about this God stuff, period. It says, in fact, though, by this time, you ought to be teachers. You ought to be telling other people. But you need someone to teach you. And you're still in kindergarten. If I had $1 for every time I said, oh, boy, this is not how second graders act. Are we really cutting each other's hair with scissors? Are we really swinging around a ruler? Like, you need the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You're still drinking from a bottle.
Yeah.
You're not ready for anything solid. Anyone who lives on milk is still an infant and is not acquainted with teaching about righteousness.
Yeah. And there's verse 11, so I have it highlighted in red because this is just so, this is like a one of those horns, like those warning horns. Like, there's something seriously wrong here. We have much to say about this, but it's hard to make it clear to you because you no longer try to understand.
You're not even trying.
Not even trying to understand. And that's where it comes down to, guys, it's important that we understand that it's not about the effort that we put into being perfect, right? But we're just supposed to trust and try to understand, but you can't just give up and walk away from it and say, this is just too hard. It's too hard. I've had enough of it. And it's funny because verse 14 kind of stood out to me there. It says, "But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil." And it reminds me of just like a couple of weeks ago when we have dinner, we like to watch a little television, and for some reason Noah wanted to watch like a really old season of Survivor, right? And you all know about Survivor. Anyways, there was they were at like the last 4 or 5 people. I think it was the final 5 or 6 maybe. But anyways, there was this guy. He was an older guy. He was like 71 years old.
72.
But he was ripped. I mean, he was just, and he was like an ex-FBI agent.
He's all muscle bound.
Yeah, and he was super fit. He wasn't really winning all of the challenges though, because I mean,
but
it was
he had
hot and it was
outlasted.
But yeah,
like
he was
all these young people.
Yeah, and he was hardworking, and he did all this stuff, and finally, like he didn't win anything ever, and finally he won a reward. He didn't even win like one of the immunity challenges. He won a reward, and it was a reward where like they got to go and feast like on all this food.
They went to a spa and stayed overnight.
Yeah.
And got all this food.
And so. And if you know anything about Survivor, the people there, they basically subsist on coconut water and like coconuts,
maybe
and
some crabs.
Yeah, some of the crabs they can catch in the water there, and in this particular show, mangoes, right? So coconut water, crabs, and mangoes, right, is what they had to eat for the most part. They had a chicken, but they wouldn't eat it because it was one of the guys. Anyways, long story short, they're sitting there at this barbecue feast, and there's all this meat spread out before them. And there's this moment before they start eating where everybody's kind of looking at the food, and this guy says, I don't really eat meat.
I don't eat beef, he says.
That's what it was.
I don't eat red meat.
Because he was like fit. He like trained his body, and so his body was accustomed to like chicken and lean meats and stuff.
But he had been like 30-some days with no food.
So they were living on basically milk, right? And then suddenly they had this opportunity to gorge themselves with beef, with meat. And he did. He just stuffed himself.
He kept going, it's so good.
It's so good. It's so good. Because like I guess he literally had never had beef before. He was just like,
well, it had been a long time.
And the other people that were with him, there were a couple of girls, and they were taking it easy. They're like, I don't know if you should do this. But he was just like, blah, 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 blah. And anyhow, it turns out that the next morning he woke up and he was like super constipated, right? Because that meat gummed up his system because he hadn't been eating any meat, and so his body wasn't ready for taking on
that much
protein to the point where they actually had to airlift him out of there. He got so sick because his whole system got so backed up he couldn't do anything. He couldn't expel anything from his body without being gross, and they had to emergency evacuate him before he had kidney failure. Because of the barbecue.
Day 36, right. And they're only out there 39 days.
And he was likely one of the ones who would have probably made it almost to the very end.
He probably would have won.
And because everybody loved him. But he fell short. He got taken out because he went from elemental things and went straight into that solid stuff. And his body wasn't accustomed to the deeper, more solid, more difficult things, right?
Right.
And so when the writer of Hebrews is writing about this, it just made me think about that. Is that if you live your whole life on nothing but spiritual milk, which is basically just baby food, right? Yes. And never take the chance to go a little bit deeper and introduce yourself slowly to more and more difficult things, more and more challenging things.
Yeah.
When the big one comes, and you're like, I'm going to have a steak. It doesn't work out well for you.
You're not going to be able to poop.
You're not going to be able to. And you'll get taken out of the game. Just, you're done. You're done. But that is the danger here.
Kind of the analogy, right?
Right. And so, but the problem is that they didn't try. They didn't try anymore.
Yeah.
They just wanted, but I like the milk. The milk is good.
If I just hold my hand, somebody will do it for me.
Yeah.
Complacency is the sin here.
Yeah.
Complacency.
Yeah. And
who would have thought complacency could be a sin? It's a big one.
It is a big problem. Yep.
It's a big one.
Yep.
Oh, somebody else will do it.
Yeah. And again, that's not trust, and then that comes down to not trusting that God will be able to do in us and through us the things that are necessary.
Right.
Or here in this place, sadly, not wanting to.
Yep.
Just not wanting to. I imagine maybe there were a lot of people, going back to the previous video, there were a lot of people standing there at the Jordan River and they were like, maybe God can take him out, but kind of like it here on this side. We got a pretty good deal. Camp's not so bad. And
I'm just gonna sit here.
We get donuts from the sky, and when we complain enough, like birds will fly in. We just grab a couple and pick them up. It's not so bad.
I just sit here, My hands are occupied.
Yeah, right. And so there are two great errors or two great sins here. Of one of lack of faith, and the other of apathy. Of just I just don't really care. So that's Hebrews chapter 5 in a nutshell.
Ooh, and we ended up kind of on a gouge there. But sometimes we need a good smack with a flip-flop, man. A good chanclazo is not a bad thing sometimes.
That's the word of the day, chanclazo. So
chanclazo.
So if you want to join us on Sundays, we talk about this stuff and a whole lot more.
Right there.
Right there is our contact information. Look at that, first try.
You got it.
First try.
I'm more too far.
Yeah. Go that way. So look there that's how you can get in touch with us. Again, I'm not going to go on the whole meta time warp thing. We will be at the Hickory Village Clubhouse this Sunday for church. So if you'd like to join us there, 6 o'clock. We'll be there. There'll be food. I don't know, maybe pizza, maybe fried chicken, maybe both. I don't know. You never know. Maybe it'll just be crackers and cheese. I don't know. But no, we'll have real food. So 6 o'clock.
We may have both.
Village. We may have all of them. We may have all the food. And at least I do know there's a drinking fountain there. So we'll definitely have water. And so nice comfy couches if you're worried about that. But anyways, so thank you guys for joining us. We made it through.
If you stuck out both videos, good on you.
Yeah. You don't have to watch them both at the same
Good
time.
on you.
Raise a glass.
Raise a glass.
Crazy. All right.
Drive me crazy.